Bishop Strickland took yesterday to X to go off on a bishop who was appointed by Pope Leo XIV to the Diocese of Baker. This is Bishop Tom Hennon. There are conflicting reports out here. If you look at his record on paper, it looks pretty good. Some of the usual suspects are celebrating this appointment, though. This is one of those reasons why I have questions. So we're going to go over this because Bishop Strickland's response to this has gotten him called out. And I'm not calling out Bishop Strickland. I'm going to show you what he had to say, and I'm going to show you what the new Bishop of Baker's track record is. And we're going to try to figure this out together. But it's not also the only new bishop's appointment either. There was an unequivocally bad one appointed in this past week down in Austin. Another bishop who's going to get political, without question. He already had a track record of it, and he's going to get political. We're going to talk about these things. And I'm going to start here with the news as it was posted by, of course, Mr. Rich Reho. Starting to sound like a broken record, using him a lot lately. But he says, Pope Leo has appointed Father Thomas Hennon, 47, as Bishop of Baker, Oregon. I have in-laws who live there, relatives who live in that diocese. Hennon was the Vicar General of Davenport and Rector of Sacred Heart Cathedral. In 2023, the bishop-elect was responsible for working with then-Bishop Zinkula on the ministry to the James Martin-type Catholics. This is why some people have some issues. And I'll show you the article he has linked here in a couple minutes, but it's to the National Catholic Reporter, not a ringing endorsement by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I actually read that National Catholic Reporter article. It doesn't mention the priest all that much, but he is mentioned there. And he is mentioned in a way that sounds like he helped develop the policy, which is talked about as being a more conservative policy than some voices in the church want. Part of his track record is working with Courage International, an organization that I have lauded in the past for working with Catholics who have those inclinations, we'll say, but they don't act on them. They don't want them. They want to live as the church commands us to live. And they view what they're drawn to in life as a cross that they must carry. They seek sanctity. They are a model for all Catholics. But it's not lost on me. The National Catholic Reporter seems to be a little positive about this either. So I'm going to just show you what Bishop Strickland had to say. I'll give you his statement in full. And he's gotten pushback for this. He says, quote, "Some will cry too harsh, but enough is enough. With the appointment of Father Thomas Hennon, Bishop-elect, as Bishop of Baker, Oregon, we face a troubling reality. Instead of correcting the trajectory set by Pope Francis, Pope Leo XIV is doubling down on it, deepening the ambiguity that has plagued the Church." Now, as an aside, even without the appointment of Father Thomas Hennon, you can see what he's saying there is accurate. We've seen this in other appointments and some statements he's made. He's been talking a lot about the cry of the earth, care for our common home stuff that is verbatim from Francis. So you don't need the appointment of Father Thomas Hennon to point to this ambiguity, because there is some ambiguity here. Father Hennon is not merely a well-meaning pastor. He was intimately involved in drafting pastoral guidelines that blur the clear lines of Catholic teaching on matters of the flesh. His work with Davenport's James Martin-type directive may carry the veneer of welcoming language, but in substance it echoes the rhetorical strategies of the ideology of the flesh, undermining Catholic clarity and weakening the call to chastity. When who we are as men and women becomes negotiable, the gospel becomes negotiable. This doctrinal smokescreen is the hallmark of the Lavender Group, a clandestine network within the church hierarchy that protects and advances James Martin ideology while masquerading under the banner of compassion. It gained unprecedented influence during the Francis era, from the explicit approval of James Martin's parody of holy matrimony to Episcopal cover-ups. Its tentacles now reach into the Leo papacy, and Father Hennon's appointment is proof. Pope Francis presided over doctrinal collapse. Fiducia Supplicans green-lighted blessings of James Martin's pairings, plain and simple. That rupture has not been undone by Pope Leo. It is being compounded. As shepherds, we are called not to pick our metaphors, but to call sin precisely, and when mercy soft soils the truth, souls are lost. As bishops, we have a sacred duty to cry out to our Holy Father. If we're serious about reform, dismantle this network of confusion. Remove ideologues who use pastoral language to conceal doctrinal erosion. Any shepherds who preach the unvarnished, uncompromised gospel of Christ. Appoint shepherds rather, not politically correct euphemisms dressed in synodal platitudes. I speak not in a spirit of rebellion, but fidelity to Christ and his bride. If that is too strong for Rome, then the silence from the top is deafening proof that nothing has changed. The faithful deserve better. The bride of Christ demands better. We will remain loud, unwavering, and clear. No more blessings without conversion. No more ambiguity. No more lavender group. Can't use that M word on YouTube. Found that one out the hard way. And here's some of the responses. You're going to see all kinds of responses to this. John Monaco, a very good, moderate, traditionally minded voice, says, and I say moderate in terms of how he presents things. He doesn't go off on people. He says he worked with courage. He's no Jim Martin. I understand the hesitation. This seems extremely hasty and imprudent on your part. Tridentine Brewing, another large account worth following, does say this is a W, a win, assumed to be Bishop Hennon worked with courage. Calling him out. There's no such thing as a James Martin Catholic. These are terms that distort Catholic identity. This just isn't correct. Another one says there's a lot of people who are calling him out for this. Now, my counter argument here, just to play devil's advocate. Bishop Strickland was in the USCCB. He was part of the bishops. He knew them all well. I would suggest that he might be influenced by things he knew firsthand, but that doesn't necessarily mean this wasn't also a hasty miscalculation. He posted this one earlier when he was talking about this. He said, the newly appointed Bishop of Baker, Oregon is mentioned in this article. Connecting the dots isn't hard. A priest actively supporting sinful lifestyles is now a bishop, while faithful priests who teach the truth are removed from parishes still in 2025. And that is true. I've covered some of the bishops who have been, or priests who have been removed this year, the last couple of months even, from their parishes. So, again, there is some pushback, we'll say. And I'm going to give you some of the evidence to the counter argument, not because I'm going after Bishop Strickland, but because the truth must prevail. This comes from the personal blog of one Father Christopher Young, who is in the Diocese of Davenport, where the new bishop-elect of Baker, Oregon is from. He says, congratulations, Bishop-elect Hennon. Diocese of Baker's gain is Diocese of Davenport's loss. Screenshot of the USCCB announcement. We'll put this here so you can see. It says, Father Tom was one of several Davenport priests who responded to then Bishop Martin Amos's invitation. When Summorum Pontificum in 2007 was promulgated, to learn and offer the TLM for those stable groups in the Davenport Diocese who requested it. That's not a bad thing, to be clear. He faithfully responded it was one of the rota of priests offering the traditional Mass for years, whom I later counted on as pastor of a TLM site, myself, who was his first vocation, to deal with Davenport's Director of Vocations. As the Vicar General of our diocese, he supported the creation of the chaplaincy for the community, celebrating the preconciliar rites in the Diocese of Davenport last year, when we were between bishops, against Bishop Strickland, who owes Bishop-elect Hennon an apology. This is what this priest from the Diocese of Davenport says. Now, he's posting a screenshot here that I do think is going too far, saying lying is a mortal sin. Meaning he's accusing Bishop Strickland of lying. Bishop Strickland might merely be wrong, which is different than lying. It says, Father Hennon works with courage, a therapy ministry approved by the church that seeks the conversion. Can't use those two words together. You can't. I don't know why our hosts are so militant about this, but they are. It's not Father James Martin slop that denies Christ's teachings. That's his general response. Now, that having been said, let's go take a look at New Ways Ministry, because I think from what my reading on all of this has been is that this priest has tried to thread the needle, or this bishop has, between the James Martin position and the Catholic, the Courage International position. And I don't know if that's a courageous position. I mean, it's courageous in relation to the hierarchy and what happens to you if you come out in defense of Catholic orthodoxy. But I don't know if that's actually the proper response. I'm torn on it. I'm curious if you think threading the needle is a good option here, and you see that here. This is from October 2023. This is an article about the pastoral ministries that they've all been alluding to, that Bishop Strickland alluded to. And this is New Ways Ministry is one of the most infamous organizations in the church. And I'll put in the church in quotes. Their founders were a heterodox priest and a heterodox nun The prefix to the word heterodox is the only thing that only part that applies, that prefix applies to, is their theology, because it's different than Catholic theology. They have been attempted to be suppressed numerous times since the 70s. And then you start getting the nun who was the founder or co-founder of the organization getting pictures taken with Pope Francis and him writing letters to her telling her about how great of a job she was doing. Back in October 2023, the so-called advocates for the James Martin stuff were celebrating these new pastoral accompaniment guidelines. And the question you need to ask yourself here, I didn't see Bishop Strickland asking, was how much was the auxiliary bishop, the assistant bishop, responsible for this? Saying the TLM is a positive sign, but there's an open secret in traditionalist communities. We don't talk about this much. But there are parishes full of traditionalists, we'll call them in quotation marks, that if you scratch them, they bleed hammer and sickle red. They are, we'll call them, Marxists with good liturgical taste. So there is that problem, and it may not just be on, economics and distortions of Catholic social teaching issues, which I am not, to be clear, accusing Bishop Hennon of. But saying the traditional Mass isn't going to be a guarantee that you have a good Orthodox bishop or priest. So here's what Outreach, or New Ways Ministry, rather, one of the most notorious organizations in the church, has to say about all this. Again, dated October 20th, 2023, when these new pastoral guidelines that are at the core of this question, how they reported on it. James Martin type Catholics and supporters are celebrating a new set of guidelines that aims to treat James Martin types with welcome, love, and respect. The Diocese of Davenport, Iowa, recently released their guidelines for pastoral accompaniment of these sort of groups. As Bondings 2.0 previously reported, the documents focused around 5 principles: dignity of the human person, acknowledging these these groups that are in the minority when it comes to their identifying with and celebrating their sins of the flesh, a commitment to love and listening, collaborative involvement, and a case-by-case approach. The new guidelines were created to help clergy and school personnel learn to work with those facing these identity challenges. They were approved by Bishop Thomas Zinkula. He is the Bishop of Davenport. This is the bishop who Bishop Hennon was an auxiliary bishop, and before that, the vicar general for. For many Catholic of types of these advocates, the Davenport guidelines provide a compassionate pastoral approach to understanding these identities. The National Catholic Reporter interviewed a wide range of advocates. Again, and I do have a National Catholic Reporter article here, the one that Bishop Strickland shared, as his evidence. Ray DeVere, a retired deacon who was the father of a person who was confused about the immutable nature of the flesh, states that the guidelines are, quote, truly a milestone in the evolution of the church's approach to the James Martin community, especially those confused about the immutable nature of the flesh. David Palmieri, a Catholic school educator who has researched diocesan policies of these kind, has found that there's a disconnect, quote, between the legalism of many policies and the lived experiences of the human person. If you've been paying attention lately, I've been warning you to watch for the phrase lived experiences in relation to church documents, because it comes right out of the condemnations in Pascendi Dominici Gregis of Pope Pius X, when he condemned the heresy of modernism, because the heresy of modernism relies on vital immanence, as he called it, which relies on the lived experiences of individuals. The faith, the life of faith, the way we understand religion, is an internalized lived experience thing, and we will only come to know the truth of religion and of our religious claims and teachings by sharing our lived experiences with one another. So again, when you see this phrase, be worried. And he's quoting it directly from the policy. In his opinion, the Davenport document truly focuses on the care of each individual by approaching matters with a, quote, pastoral heart. Maxwell Kuzma, a Catholic who was very confused, who was an occasional blogger for Bondings 2.0, said Davenport guidelines were amazing to see coming from a Catholic bishop in 2023. He noted that often in Catholicism, there's an asterisk after the words, all are welcome. Father Tom Hennon, a member of the Davenport Diocese's committee on this, explained that committee members spent 3 years educating themselves studying theological and medical articles, so rooting with theology in the science, attending educational sessions, reviewing policies, and consulting with James Martin type individuals and families. The committee has also been transparent throughout their crafting process by publishing updates in the diocesan newspaper. Father, now Bishop Hennon, added, "We've taken a slower approach to this. We like to think we are taking a synodal approach. We've learned a lot in the process. Our own attitudes have changed." And it goes on. I will link this in the show notes at returntotradition.org so you can read it for yourself. You don't have to take my word on this. But it is worth noting that this is what has gotten Bishop Strickland in hot water overnight. So Brown with the super chat. If we can have abnormal relationships in our human interpersonal relationships, why can't we have an abnormal relationship with nature and the world? So how does this work with care for our common home? Don't put those pieces together. You're not going to like the answer, because the overriding principle is science. Because the church is, to borrow a term from Bishop Robert Barron, who will probably not like that I use it this way, the church is in the grips of scientism right now, placing truths of the faith at the behest of the scientific experts. And that's unfortunate. That's why you see these guidelines coming out of places like Davenport. Now, how much was the now Bishop of Baker involved in the drafting of those guidelines? He was a priest at the time, but he was in charge of doing these interviews, talking to people, and listening to the so-called science. Now let's go to the article that got Bishop Strickland in trouble because he shared it. And I will remind people that there are certain things that you can take to the bank. And when one of them is the National Catholic Reporter is happy about something, you should be very concerned. So new Iowa guidelines praised as a milestone by James Martin Catholics and advocates. It's October 7th, 2023, same date. And he is again mentioned here in much the same way that National Catholic Reporter, or that the New Ways Ministry article was. That's why I'm not just going to read it verbatim. But we can go here. The emphasis in many previous policies and guidelines has been on defending church teaching. That's the emphasis of previous policies in the diocese. And the ethics of things like whether someone can move from reality to a fake reality. While this document's first concern is that person's human dignity deeply respected, said Robert Shine, Associate Director of New Ways Ministry, a Maryland-based group providing advocacy and support for these Catholics. Shine spoke to National Catholic Reporter from Italy, where he's following developments at a historic month-long Vatican Summit on the Synod of Bishops Synod on Synodality. That's convened delegates from around the world to discuss numerous issues, including polemical ones like the role of women in the church and James Martin-type inclusion. Last year, Paul Mary told NCR there's a disconnect between the legalism of many policies and the lived experience of the human person. That he is just, again, it's noting that these advocates, those drafting these documents and influencing them, were calling the church teaching on morality of the flesh legalism. And that we can acknowledge the law and then work around the lived experiences. Again, warning from like core of modernism, the heresy of modernism. And if you want a perfect document that shows what that looks like, it's Fiducia Supplicans, which begins by affirming the church's teaching on these things and then authorizing the blessings of their pairings, of those couples and their relationships. The document explicitly spells it out for you. People reject it because they only read the affirmation part at the beginning. They don't read the implementation. Orthodoxy is upheld in words, but not in practice. This legalism, he says, creates a culture of fear. The Davenport document, however, is what guidance can look like when these matters are approached with a pastoral heart. And then it quotes the priest, now a bishop, again, talking about taking a slower approach to this. We like to think we're taking a synodal approach. And we've learned a lot in the process. Our own attitudes have changed. This is why this topic, whether or not Bishop Strickland got this right or not, deserves some nuance. There is more to this crisis in the church than the traditional Latin Mass. There's also the ecclesiology. When you get a bad ecclesiology, everything else flows from it. And the modernists tell us that the ecclesiology of the Catholic Church changed at Vatican II, and that the traditional Mass is not compatible with it anymore. A whole other debate, but it goes to everything else. Ecclesiology is the theology of the church, how it views its relationship to God, how it views the relationship between man and God, and the relationship of the church to the world. They changed the ecclesiology of. The old ecclesiology was essentially hostility. When you hear phrases like, Satan is the prince of the world, that Satan rules the world, that's the old ecclesiology telling you. You don't hear that stuff anymore, except maybe in passing. The committee read and discussed theological and medical articles, and after 2020 and 2021, that should cause your hackles to go up, attended educational sessions and reviewed documents from other dioceses, the U.S. bishops, and the Vatican. And the members spoke at length with James Martin types and their families. Some bishops have claimed they're consulted with the confused people, but nothing about those consultations seems to show up in the documents, Shine said. In this case, Davenport, it very much shows that not only was there listening, but confused voices were heard, taken to heart. And the entire crux of this, how deep was the new Bishop of Baker involved in this? That is the question. Because Bishop Strickland got a lot of pushback for posting this. He got a lot of pushback for posting this relatively long for X. This is a long post where he basically connected the dots and said Pope Leo XIV is doubling down on Francis. And the defense of him is largely based on the fact that he worked with Courage, a good group, and that's a good thing. Courage International is a group that does heroic work, helping Catholics who want to live as Catholics, who just have an inclination that none of us, normal rest of us, can understand. And that's a heavy cross to carry, especially in a world that tells you it's normal. Courage International, if you're really fed up with Catholic organizations, some of them, and you're wondering who to donate to, maybe Courage should be a group you should look at. This is a nuanced question. But what was his role in drafting those documents? Because you don't need the input of those people, those confused advocates for tossing out Catholic morality, in drafting of a policy like this, except maybe to identify the errors coming from that group and how to reach out to them to bring them back into the light of Christ. That's what's needed. Beyond that, we don't know what his role was. But it's something that we need answers to that question. It could very well be that Bishop Strickland overstepped his bounds. It could be. He's human. I've done it before. He's done it before, I'm sure. But that's not the only troubling appointment. We go here to complicit clergy. Pope names another pro-immigration bishop, this time in Austin. Very strange pectoral cross this bishop is wearing. The bishop in question is a board member of the scandal-ridden Catholic Relief Services, because of course he is. Pope Leo XIV has named Bishop Daniel Garcia of Monterey, California, to be the next Roman Catholic Bishop of Austin, promoting another vocal ally on immigration to a leadership position in Texas. The move, announced at a news conference earlier this week at the Diocese of Austin, comes at a time when Catholic bishops across the state have denounced President Trump's mass removal efforts. Many influential Texas Catholics, including Governor Greg Abbott, have expressed support for the new administration's plan that includes allowing enforcement agents into schools, hospitals, and churches to make arrests. When the Catholic Church teaches that a nation has the right to control its boundaries, Garcia, a 64-year-old Texas native, delivered a message in both English and Spanish to say the church would speak up for the poor, the weak, and those who live on the margins, including undocumented immigrants, per the Catholic News Agency. The bishop was a board member of Catholic Relief Services, which faces an uncertain future amid Trump's slashed funding aid, cited St. Vincent de Paul during a speech saying it will be the poor who will be our entrance into heaven. Again, categorically rejecting what the church has to say on that entire policy area. For those who maybe don't know what the church actually says, the church says states have a duty to welcome the poor and to welcome people who want to move from one place to another. The church also says that you as a person have to follow Caesar's rules, including on entry into their place. Governments have the right to determine who can and cannot enter a country and under what circumstances they can enter. Now, if you want to have a debate on the process for migration being really hard for America, that's true. But it's also light years easier than in a lot of other places. And you know this if you've ever looked at, say, the immigration policies of Mexico. Boy, has Mexico got the kind of policies that would cause the political secular left in this country to have a total meltdown if the U.S. implemented them. And as it turns out, most other countries have very hard migration policies. Most of them don't enforce it. The U.S. has actually got fairly liberal ones compared to a lot of other places, and that shouldn't surprise you given our history. I'm not going to say do the America, a nation of immigrants thing, but I'm not going to deny that immigration has played a rather key role in our country's development. This is not the first one of these bishops. This is like the fifth one of these bishops or something in the last 2 months, whereas Pope Leo begins filling in the backlog of vacancies in the U.S. episcopate. And his previous job, as Cardinal Robert Prevost, was to be the prefect for the dicastery of bishops. It was his job to know who the bishops were, to help the Pope make the decisions on who gets what appointment. That was his job. So he knows who these people are. It was his job to know. And now they're getting appointments. We're seeing this pretty consistent track record. Traditionalist Catholic says there in Mexico City there's protests with some violence on expats. Yeah, it's a fascinating story. If you don't know the details of this, it's one I've been kind of quietly for my own entertainment been following for months now. But since 2020, there's been an explosion of Americans working remotely and choosing to live in Mexico City because it's cheap. And so they can take and these are, people who work online, doing tech support, doing programming, whatever it is, things that they can work remotely for. And they're living in Mexico City, causing the rent down there to drive up and causing the economy to go all crazy because suddenly you have an influx of US dollars in the economy. And the culture is changing. It's getting very Portlandified or Austinified or whatever else you want to use. And they've had enough. And you know what? On this issue, I stand with the denizens of Mexico City. They have a right to have Mexico City remain Mexico City, to have it to be the culture that reflects their culture. They have every right to that, just as you have every right to have your neck of the woods remain your neck of the woods. Now, I'm curious what you think about, like, when it comes to the Bishop of Austin, Colleen is correct. What a political appointment. Leo knows Texas is a red state, so he purposely sends someone from communist California to disrupt Trump or red states. Pathetic. I do think there's a lot of politics here, and that was my fear with this appointment when I started looking at Cardinal Robert Prevost's background on things. But I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think Bishop Strickland overstepped his bounds on this? Do you think he went off, he went off prematurely? Do you think he gave a one-sided take on this? Do you think it's nuanced? That there's good with the bad and we got to wait and see with the Bishop of Baker? I'm curious. I'm not these days willing to give as much of a pass as I have in the past on this stuff. But his working with courage, as Raven Ray says, is a positive sign. His courage is worthy of our support. I pray it doesn't get infiltrated. You should pray for that because after Fiducia Supplicans, courage bent the knee to it. There are reasons for that. Courage operates in every diocese, and if they came out against a very high-profile act of the Roman pontiff, they might not be able to do their work in dioceses anymore. So, they were between a rock and a hard place. Pete Horn says, has anyone else noticed the same theme has been rolled out across the Western world? Groups of those in the minority, first over everyone. They're traitors to the monarchy of Christ the King. Right, and we should always be protective of the voices of those in the minority in whatever way you want to contemplate that. What the First Amendment's about. The speech that needs protecting is unpopular speech. That's what needs protecting. It's not speech that's popular, that has widespread support. That's never what needs protecting and defending. It's always that of those who you're most likely to disagree with. It's just that in our day and age, that's us. We're the ones whose opinions on things need to be protected because we're the ones standing against the grain of the culture and especially against the grain of the state. But I'm just curious. Chastity Maria says, I don't think James Martin would celebrate the appointment of Baker in Portland if he didn't believe it would help his cause. We all know what his cause is. And that's the thing. Rich Reho posted this, and he's definitely of the same sort of, we'll say leanings, not inclinations. I'm not accusing him of that. But they're fellow travelers in the synodal revolution in the church. And James Martin did retweet a bunch of this stuff. He didn't comment on it directly, though. So Craig Anello says Bishop Strickland looks like St. Paul compared to the rest. Yes, but he got pushback from people who also support him. And that's the question. Was this something worthy of that? I don't think when it comes to Austin that that's even a question. You have another rabble-rouser of a bishop, and we don't need any more of that. Now, I'm curious, though, in general, what are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. There is one other thing. You may have noticed that Pope Leo XIV has been talking at length lately about care for our common home. The Laudato Si program continuing that of Pope Francis. And there are signs that people have had more than enough of that, too. I've noticed that people's feelings towards the Pope, their patience is starting to get worn thin. We are here now 2 months into his papacy. And people's patience appears to be being worn thin. I've seen this all over the place, including from talking to people personally, but the official account of Pope Leo XIV Pontifex, this was Pope Francis's old account. Here he says, "The Lord has entrusted us with the mission to care for creation and to bring it peace and reconciliation. We hear the cry of the earth and the poor. For that cry has reached the heart of God. Our indignation is his indignation. Our work is his work. Hashtag Laudato Si." So if you take this sentence by sentence, it has entrusted us with the mission for care for creation. If you read Genesis, man is given stewardship of the earth. No one disputes that. In fact, even most Catholics who are very conservative and traditionalist and who stand in opposition to the secular program about the thermometer and stuff being dumped into the atmosphere, we don't dispute this. It's their political program attached to it that we have a problem with, and their scientific claims. That's not disputation. And even to bring it peace and reconciliation, well, if by that you mean peace and reconciliation by the recognition of Christ and submission to him and his church, then absolutely, we are in the mission to bring it peace and reconciliation. After all, outside the church, there is no salvation. Jesus is, as he said, the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. Then we go on to here. We hear the cry of the earth. That's interesting. And the poor. Yes, for that cry has reached the heart of God. There are sins listed in the Old Testament and the New that talk about being sins that cry out to heaven for justice, some of them related directly to the poor. Our indignation is his indignation. Our work is his work. Hashtag Laudato Si. The entire problem is the cry of the earth stuff. The earth is not a human being. It's creation. We have a duty to protect it in that stewardship sense. So yes, I do object to people bulldozing the Amazon. That's a lot of problems with that. But the earth doesn't cry. And then you start getting the pushback from priests, from a bishop. I think he's an independent schismatic bishop, though. They exchange the truth about God for a lie and worship and serve the creation rather than the creator. Holy Father, why do you keep berating us with the writings from Francis, who is definitely a Marxist, and highly probable that Francis was indeed the false prophet of the Antichrist with his heretical teachings on the James Martin stuff and other faith issues? I would dispute that he was the false prophet of the Antichrist. You might say he was there's plenty of those in history, but that's a big claim. You need evidence for it, especially since apparently the false prophet, according to Revelation, was going to appear to be at his end and then suddenly miraculously heal. So I've read. So probable that he was the false prophet, probably not. Bob, he says, okay, first, you don't have to like Pope Leo XIV. You don't have to think he's the best thing ever, but calling him Bob is probably too much. This sentimental pantheism is disguised as mission. Creation is not a victim crying to heaven, but an ordered hierarchy governed by providence. Quoting the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, Part 1, question 22. The true mission Christ entrusted to the church is not reconciliation with the earth, but the conversion of souls and their salvation from sin. And it goes on and on like that. I know it's X, bit of a bubble, but I've seen this elsewhere, not just on social media. I've seen this in person. People's patience is wearing thin. It's probably because of these appointments, honestly. But is the appointment of the Bishop of Baker a good one, a mixed one, or a bad one? Was Bishop Strickland's response to it appropriate, inappropriate, or somewhere in between? The bishop has worked with Courage International. You will never see me criticizing someone for working with Courage International, ever. He should be applauded for that. But judging from his own words, reported in the very friendly to the James Martin topic media, they were listening to those confused about the immutable nature of the flesh and listening to them and applying it in a synodal fashion, and that is an enormous red flag. I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media, it helps a lot too. Please pray for the church. Pray for everybody we spoke about today. Again, not trying to make you angry at Pope Leo XIV. Generally speaking, he and the bishops and things don't need my help with that, unfortunately. Pray for him that he does the will of God and not whatever else might be attempting to influence his decisions. Same with any other bishop in the church. Same with everybody else. We should all be listening, prayerfully listening for the voice of God and his guidance in the important things we do in life. We should always be doing that. So pray for the Pope in that way. And pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.